Welcome to Distracted, the podcast with Angela Lockwood, the place where you will find practical brain-boosting strategies, expert insights, and real-life stories to help busy brains thrive in the age of distraction. Let's go. Welcome to Distracted. I'm Angela Lockwood, and this is fun today because I get to speak to somebody who I admire, who I have spoken to before. And in fact, Sharon Collon and I once spoke before in a previous season, and it was A Kid's Life of the podcast. And Sharon's and my episode was the highest downloaded episode of any interviews I have done in my history of making podcasts. So I'm very excited to have her back. Obviously, the work that Sharon does as an ADHD coach and consultant really resonates with people. And the reason I've asked Sharon back onto the podcast now is if you listen to episode 58, where I interviewed a lady called Lyndall Brennan. And Lyndall had just been navigating a diagnosis of ADHD at age 44. And since that went to air, I have been inundated with messages of people going, "Thank you so much for sharing that episode. Thank you for sharing the story. I'm going through this myself. People just really connected with Lyndall's story." So I wanted to invite Sharon back on here because Sharon's the founder of the Functional Family, and we will unpack this further. She is the expert in ADHD and the expert in attention deficit. So Sharon, welcome back on Distracted.
For our chat today. I always love catching up with you.
How exciting. I don't think you knew that you were the highest downloaded episode on the podcast.
I love that so much because, well, I'm really up for anything that starts conversations about ADHD. And if people are interested, I will keep talking till the cows come home about it because it needs a lot more conversations about it. We need to be open and approachable and put out the correct information about ADHD. So love that there's so much interest.
Well, you've just sort of opened the door, so I'm going to jump straight into that. Understanding ADHD, what is the difference between a diagnosis of ADHD, ADD to just being distracted?
Okay, so the actual difference is differences in the brain. ADHD by nature is a different brain. It's a neurological difference. And that's to do with neurotransmitters in the brain. It's to do with the prefrontal cortex of the brain. And it actually causes an impairment of executive function skills. Now, executive functions are things like organization, planning, activating. It is way bigger than just a focus issue, although that's the thing that people tend to lean towards when they think of ADHD, but we know it's bigger than that. And of course, we're going to touch on the focusing and attention things today. But there's also things like sustaining effort, ignition, momentum, frustration tolerance, emotional regulation, working memory, recall, and regulating behavior as well. So those are the sorts of things that make it quite different to, just normal struggles with maintaining attention or having an attention deficit.
So Sharon, what do you think are some of the misconceptions that people have? We hear people that are saying I'm distracted or, there's lots of things happening that I can't focus on. Why do you think so many people don't understand the difference between that and having an attention deficit disorder?
Mm-hmm. I guess it's quite normal for people to show some of the symptoms of ADHD, especially in this world of social media and, clicking quick videos on our social media and TikTok and things like that. And so that is normal for us to be a more distracted. We are more distracted than we used to be. But there is a next level in terms of executive function impairment that comes along with actually the diagnosis of ADHD. Now, so we're getting all this confusion. So there's lots of TikTok videos like, "I've lost my phone, I must have ADHD, blah, 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 blah." And they did a study in America showing that 50% of the information that you're seeing about ADHD on TikTok is actually incorrect.
Wow.
And so we're lots of information coming up about ADHD, not all of it correct. There's a lot more awareness around it. So perhaps people do have some of the symptoms and are now seeing more information about it and thinking that perhaps might, they might relate to some of the symptoms. But there is a whole qualifying panel that comes along with ADHD. It doesn't just come from focus issues exactly. Yes, sure, it is part of it, but it is a bigger picture as well. So there's a lot of information around there, and coupled with increased awareness, I think we're starting to talk about it more, which is not necessarily a bad thing.
Mm. Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head there too, in terms of there's a whole panel, right? There's a whole lot of, it's not just, oh, I feel like this part of my life, I'm a little bit more distracted than the last period of my life. It actually, there's quite a big process to go through for people to, have awareness and go through that journey, which is one of the things back in episode 58 that Lyndall and I spoke about, was the journey that she went through, which involves a lot of different health professionals, understanding your own behaviors, what are the functional deficits that you're experiencing in your life. I would love to know from you, you have a huge community of people who are all experiencing ADHD, either for themselves, for their children, or for partners. What are some of the common challenges that you're hearing from people that they're facing in their own lives when it comes to ADHD?
So a lot of the challenges people experience is really to do with their executive function struggles. So those things that I mentioned before, but it's bigger than that. So when we focus in on, say, if we use a child example, there's lots of strategies on how to support that individual with ADHD. But what we see is ADHD in general is a dysregulated nervous system. And now the phenomenon is that the people who support the people with ADHD also end up with dysregulated nervous systems, right? Because whenever we have homes that have emotional regulation issues with stress resilience, issues with frustration tolerance, lots of people end up dysregulated from supporting and being in that supporting role. So parents can often have a really hard time with that, coupled with judgment that comes from the outside world about ADHD. Lots of people have a very, very strong opinion about ADHD, and a lot of the time, in fact, most of the time, it's not based on facts, or it's based on really outdated information or stigmas that no longer apply anymore and need to be thrown out.
Do you mind just touching on what some of those are that you see
yes.
people? Yeah, what are some of those judgments? Because I'm with you there. I hear it all the time myself. So do you mind sharing what some of those would be?
Okay, firstly, where's the wine? I'm ready for a rant.
I'll take a step back. You take over, Sharon.
So there's so many, and I've heard so many over the years. So firstly, there's the stigma the preconception that it's a little boy condition. So it's a hyperactive little boy condition, that it's only a focus issue, that you grow out of it. You absolutely do not. If you have ADHD, that is your brain. That you can learn skills around it. You might even mask it very well, but that's your brain, right? And the stigma comes around like that. It's a lack of discipline. That it's poor parenting. That child just needs a spanking. Whatever. What really comes out in a less intense way is that ADHD people are lazy. So people often say, like, why don't they? They should be able to. Why can't they just do what their siblings do or their classmates do? But the one that really blows my mind is that you can try harder out of ADHD. You can't try harder out of ADHD. You need to try differently. You need to have strategies that work for you. So what works for Johnny down the road isn't going to work for you because you have a different brain, you have a different processing system. ADHD is not a choice. It is a different processing system. So we need to honor that and help the person discover strategies that work for them and support them while they're doing that, because it is a challenging process. So that whole choice thing, recognizing the won't versus can't. So it looks like won't. It looks like they won't do it because they don't want to. But no child wants to fail or struggle. It's that they can't do it yet. So what can we do to help that child, to give them the skills so that they can participate in this beautiful life?
Wow, Sharon, that's that yet, and that there's difference, and they need to do things differently, not harder, and work harder. And I think in our culture that working harder, you can get through anything if you just work harder. but actually the harder can add to the challenges, can't it? Particularly in understanding some of the different strategies. And I think it's important for listeners to know too that you have boys that have ADHD, and you also have a husband that has ADHD. And what has the experience been like? Like, not only are you an expert in the field of it, but you also have lived experience. Can you just share what some of those, I guess, challenges, but also what are some of the joys that you have experienced with having such, beautifully built different brains in your household? Because I'm sure with having 4 people who have different thinking, different ways of looking at things, I'm sure you've learned so much about the world that maybe you may not have seen.
Oh, that's so lovely put. I really became an ADHD coach. Like, that's what started me off on this journey, was because it wasn't because I was like, I'm going to help everyone and change the world, although I would really, really like to do that now. It was just survival back in the day. I was just like, okay, this isn't working. I can't cope with the amount of intensity that goes on in my household. I don't feel like I've got the skills to be able to survive this. What can I do to get the skills? So I started researching ADHD like a woman possessed, and then experimenting and doing all sorts of weird experiments on my own children, my husband. I feel so sorry for them. Like, they deserve a medal for putting up with all of my rubbish over the years. And then obviously going back and doing the formal training and qualifying and getting certified as a coach, and really solidifying all that knowledge and all my crazy experiments that I was doing over the years. And what I learned is that the ADHD brain is magnificent. Like, it is so great. I'm constantly fascinated by it and in awe of it, because they have the best ideas. They really do think completely differently. And I really want to emphasize how that is not a bad thing. We're wanting them to sit still and be quiet and, sit in a classroom and not be disruptive, but that's not what they're built for all the time. Some of them are, but sometimes they're not. And so we need to honor where they're at and what they're good at. And there's so many skills and so many strengths that they bring to the party that I could only dream of. And all my favorite people in the world have ADHD, as you just mentioned. And so there is beautiful things that we need to honor about as well, not just the struggles, as I'm sure, the struggles get a lot of airplay, and I don't want to ever minimize someone's challenges, because there are challenges there for sure. But there's things to be celebrated there as well.
I hear a lot through social media. Take that with a grain of salt, but there's a lot of entrepreneurs and people who are very successful in business who are being diagnosed with ADHD later in life, or they have been diagnosed with ADHD as a child, and now they're living this very successful entrepreneur life. Why do you think some of those skills really lend itself to this creative side of people?
Risk-taking is a good one. So thinking differently, thinking outside of the box, thinking about, often people with ADHD have very good pattern recognition, so they're able to see things that other people don't. They have a heightened nervous system, so they often have really good peripheral vision. They're really good at assessing risk. So they deal very well in emergencies or urgent situations. So this is different to pressure, long-term pressure. That's a struggle. But urgency, they often cope really, really well. It's when their brain fires up, right? So we've got, it's an interest-based brain. So the neurotypical brain is an importance-based brain. So they're like, so someone like me, I get up in the morning and go, what's the most important thing that I achieved today? And then I work backwards from that. The ADHD brain is an interest and novelty-based brain. So they tend to follow what's interesting and novel, right? So we can see how that would lend itself perfectly to being an entrepreneur, because you're thinking differently about how things are working. You're prepared to take risks to get there. And you're also following what's interesting. And when things are interesting, what do you get really good at? You get really good at things that you're interested in. And couple that with the superpower of hyperfocus, they can get a lot done in a short amount of time when they go into those hyperfocuses. So very, very clever.
Hyperfocus is an area I'm really hyper-focusing on now. And just the impact of hyperfocus and flow, and what's the difference between being in flow and being in this state of extreme focus, but also just, that sort of almost like a body and brain detachment, where you're getting beautiful work done, compared to the difference between that and hyper focus, where you are so intensely focused on something that shut out everything else. And it's a fascinating world to understand how brains work. But I think, through this conversation already, I hope listeners are hearing that brain difference is a beautiful thing, because imagine if we all had the same brain. Like, how boring. First of all, if someone had my brain, everyone had my brain. That would be super exhausting. But
me too.
Yeah. But I think that creativity and innovation is something that we need. And I think even more so as we're coming into the world of AI and being very technologically focused, having creative thinking and having those thoughts where we see things from different angles is going to be more important than ever. To be able to come up with those sparks of creativity. What I'd love to know, Sharon, is for people that are listening, what are some of the strategies that you share with families because you do run a membership called the Functional Family, and you do run the membership, and I can see, I know people can't see this if they're listening, but behind you right now is a wall full of trophies.
Thank you.
You're winning awards in this space. You've got so many members that are sort of following you. What's the information that you share to your members, and why do you think it's making such an important impact for people?
Okay, so I think the point of difference, and what I cried out for at the beginning of our journey, was really about finding a community that was going through a similar journey, similar to what you've created, Ange, with the beautiful work that you do. Is I needed to have community that was going through similar things as me, and that's not always parenting groups. We have a different level of things that are going on in families with ADHD in there. So I wanted that community piece, and then it was more than that. So I was doing all this research about the brain, about ADHD, and then I was absorbing all this content and reading all the books about it, and then I would get in front of my own children who are triggering to me because I love them and I want the best for them, and why are they so loud? And then I would freeze. And I'd be trying to recall all the strategies that I've read, and I would come up with nothing all the time, or I'd do the wrong one, or I'd just get frustrated. And then, it was really, really quite challenging. So I wanted to create information that was very focused on practical tools. Okay, we've got some information. We've got the education piece. Now, what do we do with it? Give me some practical steps to try. Doesn't necessarily have to be the exact right ones. We can modify them for our family. Modify them for the individual, but I need some tools in my tool belt to throw at it, because otherwise I wasn't confident in my parenting approach. I felt powerless because I didn't have anything to try, and everything that I did try was very neurotypical based or rewards based, and those sorts of things didn't work for my family. And when you have oppositional defiance disorder, like what my family does, they don't like to be told what to do. They don't like it. No person with ADHD likes to be told what to do. And couple that with the sprinkling of rejection sensitivity dysphoria that comes along with ADHD, and you've got an interesting mix of parenting. You just can't throw normal parenting strategies at it. We've got to have customized approaches that work with the ADHD brain instead of against it. We're not going to force them into an operating system that is not built for them.
That's amazing. And obviously it is making such an impact, because I know that, you see the work that you do and the amount of people that are now involved in your world, that there is such a need for this. And I think what I'd love to know from you too, Sharon, I feel like I could talk to you forever, but I'm so mindful of time. I've got like my 3,000 questions here to go through with you. But for people who are maybe struggling at the moment with either they've been newly diagnosed themselves, or they're on the journey of getting a diagnosis, or they're not, and they're just sort of in their world of trying to better understand how their brain works, what do you suggest for them in terms of staying connected with who they are? So, I know this is a very loaded question, but this can be a very isolating space when you're trying to understand yourself and you're trying to understand your brain. What are some of the strategies that you would suggest for them to stay connected to who they are throughout this process?
I think the thing that we need to really highlight is that every individual has strengths. We all have unique strengths that make us who we are. And when we have tools that work with those strengths, they're the ones that feel like they're the most in alignment for us. And so we know that self-esteem struggles come along with ADHD. And I always want to honor that. The world is a spiky place out there. It's spiky for all of us, and we need to lean heavily on our strengths and know that what works for us, it can look a little bit different. And that the world is an experiment. We can fail spectacularly and stuff up and start again and try again and find what feels in alignment with us and our values and our strengths. So as you're going through this process, to have a look at the things that you do easily or that come easily to you, or people say that you're good at, or you're good at, and most people have a pretty good idea of what those things are. Always good to ask your friend or your parents or someone about what you are good at if you need that help, because they're pretty good at telling us those things. And leaning into those quite heavily. So yes, you might struggle paying the bills on time, right? Like example, you might struggle paying the bills on time, but you might be awesome at planning a family day out, right? So what is it about that activity that allows you to shine? Okay. So what's the difference between this one and this one? Is it that you're using a lot of interest in that? It's something new. It's something exciting when you're planning the family day out. What is it about it? Is it the fact that you're planning it when you're at a coffee shop, not at your boring desk at home? What is it? Can we draw some of those things that make it easier for you into the thing that makes it the thing that you struggle with? Honoring what you're good at, honoring the strengths that you've already got. Is it possible to pull that a little bit over there and honor that?
I just love that, because so often, particularly, we're even talking about, sometimes it's classified as a deficit, it's attention deficit, hyperactivity disorder, attention deficit disorder. It's even got the word deficit in its title. What I and what I'm hearing you say too is that actually it can be a real strength. Yes, there's an acknowledgement of challenges and difference in thinking. But man, there's so many strengths that if you understand yourself and you take the time to be aware and understand yourself better, that you can actually really flourish and have this amazing life. And the more people I speak to too, Sharon, who are being diagnosed as adults, have had a miraculous life. They've had so much success, but what we don't see is sometimes that struggle and hardship behind the scenes where they've been trying to work it out themselves. So before we finish up, I'd love to know, what do you feel around the power of community when it comes to better understanding your brain and how it works? Is there a place for being with people who are like you and building that sense of community, or is it about also reaching out to other people and learning about how other people's brains think differently?
Oh, so I guess it's both. And for me, there's power in being surrounded in people that are going through a similar journey, because they're the people that get where you're at. But there's also so much power in everyone being individual and learning from each other. And we get to participate in this incredible life. There's enough room for everyone. And learn from each other. What works for you? What works for me? What works for the person down the road? We all operate differently, and we all have different levels and different skills, and we all sit, in different positions on different topics. And it's nice that we get to share in that, in that difference. And celebrate it.
My last question for you, Sharon, is what is the one thing that you want listeners who are listening to this episode to take away from our conversation today?
Okay, so I guess I like the analogy of when we were talking before, it just flashed up in my brain that there is challenges that come along with ADHD, right? There is challenges that come along with attention deficit. There is challenges that come along with this modern world. And I kind of view it a little bit like Spider-Man. I'm going to throw it out there. He gets the ability to web, right? And at the start, he's a bit all over the place with it. He just keeps webbing himself. It causes him lots of frustration and problems. But then he goes away and to this industrial area, and he practices it and learns how to use his gift in his favor. And that is how I view ADHD, and that is how I view any sort of challenges that you come up against in your life, is that everything has hidden strengths and gifts and things like that. And sure, we can web ourselves, and it can cause problems along the way. But the more we learn about it, the more skills and scaffolding we give ourselves around it, we can make it work for us. It's a positive story. You can learn executive function skills. You can learn strategies, just like what you're helping your audience do around being distracted, around focus. You can learn things, and you will find the things that work for you over time. And there's no good or bad. There's no pass or fail. It's really about working out what feels good for you and developing tools around them so that you can make the gifts that you've been given work for you.
I love that analogy. Thanks so much. Sharon, thank you again for sharing your time with us. So many valuable insights. And if people want to learn more about you, where can they find you?
Yes, so come along to thefunctionalfamily.com, and I've got a free support group, a podcast called ADHD and Families. There's a membership, 6-week program, private coaching, all sorts of things. So jump in there. There's lots of free resources and things. Get involved and join our beautiful community.
Thanks, Sharon. And I can strongly recommend to anybody who has ADHD in their life and who are wanting to better understand what that looks like, what that feels like, what support there is, then rather than Googling and getting lost in the overwhelm of information, go to people who live and breathe it and who also have done the work, and it is Sharon. So head on over to thefunctionalfamily.com, and I'll have all the links to that at the bottom of this episode. And if you enjoyed this, you might also enjoy our initial conversation that I had with Sharon back at episode 28, which was in the A Kid's Life season of the podcast, where we sort of talked a little bit more around ADHD in children. And so you might be interested in that. And also head to episode 58 of the podcast, where I interviewed Lyndall Brennan, who was navigating a diagnosis of ADHD at 44. So there's lots of different resources here on the Undistracted podcast, but I would also suggest heading straight on over to anything that Sharon Collon does. And if this episode you feel like somebody would benefit from it and would love to know more, please share it with them, and just do that act of gratitude and generosity as well, and sharing it with them and letting them know that you're here for them and happy to work alongside them on their own journey. So thanks so much for being Undistracted. I'm Angela Lockwood. Until next time, stay safe and enjoy.